A single Roman coin could buy you a month's worth of grain in the year 200 AD. 200 years later, you'd need 20,000 of those same coins to purchase that same amount of food. This isn't a story about barbarian invasions or military defeats. This is the story of how the wealthiest empire in human history destroyed itself from within through financial mismanagement, unchecked greed, and economic collapse. This is the story of Rome. At its peak in the 2nd century AD, the Roman Empire controlled approximately 1/3 of the known world's wealth. To put that in perspective, Rome's GDP is estimated to have been around 20 billion sesterces annually, equivalent to roughly 43 billion US dollars in today's purchasing power. The empire stretched from the windswept highlands of Scotland to the scorching deserts of Mesopotamia, from the Atlantic coast of Spain to the banks of the Euphrates River. Within these borders lived nearly 70 million people, about 1/5 of the world's total population at the time. But Rome didn't become wealthy by accident. It became the world's first true economic superpower through a combination of military conquest, innovative financial systems, and ruthlessly efficient administration. Let's understand how they built this machine. In 211 BC, Rome introduced the silver denarius, a coin that would become the backbone of Mediterranean commerce for over 400 years. The early denarius contained approximately 4.5 grams of nearly pure silver, about 95 to 98% purity. This wasn't just money, this was trust minted into metal. Merchants in Alexandria, traders in Londinium, and farmers in Gaul all accepted the denarius because they knew its value was real and consistent. Rome had created something revolutionary, a universal currency backed by precious metal and imperial guarantee. The empire's wealth didn't come solely from military plunder, though conquest certainly played its part. Rome's true genius lay in taxation and trade. Every province paid tribute to Rome. Egypt alone supplied Rome with enough grain to feed the capital for 4 months each year. The province of Hispania produced vast quantities of silver and gold from its mines. Gaul contributed grain, wine, and manufactured goods. Trade routes crisscrossed the empire, from the Silk Road terminus in Syria to the tin mines of Britain. Rome's taxation system was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Land taxes, known as tributum soli, were assessed based on agricultural productivity. Harbor duties taxed goods moving through ports. Sales taxes applied to transactions in major cities. Tax collectors, called publicani, operated throughout the provinces, ensuring steady revenue flow back to Rome. During the reign of Emperor Augustus, Rome's annual revenue reached approximately 800 million sesterces. To put this in context, a Roman legionary soldier earned about 900 sesterces per year. The empire was collecting the equivalent of nearly 900,000 soldiers' annual salaries in tax revenue alone. The Roman military, at this stage, was not just a fighting force, it was a carefully budgeted instrument of imperial policy. A single legion of roughly 5,000 men cost approximately 5 million sesterces annually to maintain, including salaries, equipment, and supplies. But here's the critical point. Military expansion during the Republic and early Empire was profitable. When Julius Caesar conquered Gaul between 58 and 50 BC, he sent back to Rome an estimated 1 billion sesterces in plunder and tribute. The conquest of Dacia by Emperor Trajan between 101 and 106 AD brought back 165 tons of gold and 330 tons of silver. These campaigns didn't drain the treasury, they filled it. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled from 161 to 180 AD, inherited what might have been Rome's wealthiest moment. The empire was at peace, trade flourished, cities prospered, and the treasury was full. Roman coins were trusted from Britain to India. Provincial governors administered justice and collected taxes efficiently. The military defended borders without constant crisis. Everything worked. But even during this golden age, problems were emerging beneath the surface. Marcus Aurelius faced a devastating plague that killed millions across the empire, reducing the tax base and labor force. He fought constant wars along the Danube frontier against Germanic tribes, wars that brought little profit but cost enormous sums. To fund these campaigns, Marcus Aurelius did something unprecedented. He reduced the silver content of the denarius from approximately 83% to 79%. It seemed like a small change, barely noticeable, but it was the first crack in the foundation. His son, Commodus, who ruled from 180 to 192 AD, made things worse.
Obsessed with gladiatorial games and personal luxury, Commodus further debased the currency to fund his extravagant lifestyle. By the end of his reign, the denarius contained only about 74% silver. Rome was beginning to consume its wealth rather than create it.
Diocletian also reformed taxation, creating a new system based on land productivity and population. He increased the size of the bureaucracy to better collect taxes and reduced the size of provinces to improve administration. But these reforms required even more revenue to implement. The empire was now caught in another trap. It needed money to fix the problems caused by not having enough money. Constantine, who ruled from 306 to 337 AD, tried a different approach. He introduced a new gold coin, the solidus, containing about 4.5 grams of pure gold. The solidus was stable and trusted, used for major transactions and military payments. But most people never saw a solidus. Daily commerce still relied on debased bronze and silver coins that continued to inflate. Constantine had created a two-tier economy, one for the wealthy and powerful, operating in stable gold, and one for everyone else, drowning in worthless currency. The social impact was devastating. The middle class, which had been the backbone of Roman prosperity, disappeared. Wealthy landowners consolidated their holdings as smaller farmers, unable to pay crushing tax burdens, abandoned their land or sold themselves into debt bondage. Cities, once vibrant centers of commerce and culture, declined as trade collapsed and population fell. The curse of high taxes fell hardest on those least able to pay. Provincial governors, desperate to meet Rome's revenue demands, employed increasingly brutal collection methods. Some farmers were tortured to reveal hidden assets. Others fled to live as bandits in the wilderness rather than face tax collectors. By 400 AD, the Western Roman Empire was functionally bankrupt. The government couldn't pay the army reliably. Provincial administration had broken down in many areas. Germanic tribes, initially hired as mercenary federates to defend Rome's borders, realized that the empire couldn't pay them and had no way to enforce their contracts. Why protect an empire that paid you in worthless coins when you could simply take what you needed? The final collapse came not with a dramatic siege or climactic battle, but with a whimper. In 476 AD, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, a teenager named Romulus Augustulus. Odoacer didn't destroy Rome. There was nothing left to destroy. He simply declined to appoint a new emperor and took the title of King of Italy for himself. The Western Roman Empire had ceased to exist, not because it was conquered, but because it was broke. Rome's collapse holds uncomfortable lessons for the modern world. The empire didn't fall because of barbarian invasions. Germanic tribes had pressed Rome's borders for centuries without destroying it. Rome fell because it destroyed its own financial foundation. It debased its currency until money became meaningless. It spent more on military defense than its economy could sustain. It taxed its productive citizens into poverty while allowing elites to avoid fiscal responsibility. It chose short-term political survival over long-term economic stability, repeatedly across generations. Consider the parallels. Today's developed economies carry debt levels that would have seemed impossible a generation ago. The United States federal debt exceeds $35 trillion. Major central banks have engaged in quantitative easing, essentially creating money to purchase government debt, not unlike Roman currency debasement. Military spending remains a massive proportion of many national budgets, often defending commitments made decades ago, regardless of current economic capacity. The Roman experience teaches us that empires don't collapse overnight. They erode, slowly, through accumulated bad decisions, each one seeming reasonable in isolation, but collectively fatal. Marcus Aurelius probably thought reducing silver content by 4% was a necessary compromise to fund legitimate defensive wars. Caracalla likely believed granting citizenship to raise more tax revenue was clever policy. Each emperor inherited a slightly worse situation than his predecessor, and passed on something slightly worse to his successor, until one day there was nothing left to pass on. Rome's greatest achievement wasn't its military conquests or architectural marvels. It was creating an economic system that generated prosperity for hundreds of millions of people across 3 continents for centuries. And Rome's greatest failure was destroying that system through fiscal irresponsibility, political short-sightedness, and institutional greed. The barbarians didn't destroy Rome. Rome destroyed itself, one debased coin at a time, one unsustainable budget at a time,
one ignored warning at a time. The question we must ask ourselves today is simple but profound. Are we repeating Rome's mistakes? Are we living beyond our means, funding present consumption with future promises, eroding trust in our institutions and currencies? History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it often rhymes. And right now, it's rhyming in some very uncomfortable ways. Rome fell not because it was weak, but because it was financially hollow. The empire that once controlled 1/3 of the world's wealth ended with a treasury so empty that it couldn't pay a single legion. That's the ultimate lesson. Wealth isn't destroyed by enemies. It's destroyed by those entrusted to protect it. And once that trust is broken, once the money becomes meaningless, everything else follows. The richest empire in history died broke. And it happened because people chose greed over wisdom, short-term gain over long-term stability, and comfortable lies over hard truths. That choice is always available, and it always ends the same way.
The Severan dynasty, which began in 193 AD with Septimius Severus, accelerated this trend. Severus increased military pay by 50% to secure army loyalty, raising annual military costs from roughly 450 million sesterces to over 675 million sesterces. His son, Caracalla, went further. In 212 AD, Caracalla granted Roman citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire through the Edict of Caracalla. This sounds progressive, but the real motive was financial. More citizens meant more people subject to inheritance taxes and other civic obligations. Caracalla also further debased the denarius and introduced a new coin, the antoninius, officially valued at 2 denarii but containing only the silver of 1.5 denarii. It was a hidden tax, a way to pay soldiers more coins that were worth less. By 235 AD, when Emperor Alexander Severus was assassinated, Rome stood at a crossroads. The empire still appeared mighty, legions still guarded the frontiers, cities still bustled with commerce, coins still circulated, but the financial foundation had been compromised. Rome had spent a generation slowly eroding the trust that held its economic system together. The currency was no longer pure. Military costs now exceeded revenues from conquest, and the empire's borders had stopped expanding, meaning no new sources of wealth were being added to offset rising costs. Rome had crossed an invisible line. It was no longer building wealth, it was consuming it, and what came next would be catastrophic. The period from 235 to 284 AD is known to historians as the crisis of the 3rd century, and it nearly destroyed Rome completely. During these 50 years, more than 50 men claimed the title of emperor. Most ruled for less than 2 years. Many were assassinated by their own soldiers. The empire fractured into competing territories, and through it all, the financial system collapsed. Emperor Gallienus, who ruled during the worst years from 253 to 268 AD, debased the antoninius to less than 5% silver content. What had once been a silver coin was now a bronze coin with a thin silver wash. Imagine holding a coin that your grandfather used to buy a week's worth of food, and that coin now buys you a single loaf of bread. That was the reality for millions of Romans. The economic impact was immediate and devastating. Prices exploded. A measure of wheat that cost 8 denarii in 200 AD cost 330 denarii by 301 AD. That's inflation of over 4,000% in a single century. Wages couldn't keep pace. A skilled craftsman who once earned enough to support his family comfortably now struggled to afford basic necessities. Soldiers, paid in increasingly worthless coins, demanded payment in goods rather than currency. Some legions refused to fight unless paid in gold or supplies rather than debased silver. The government's response made things worse. Unable to raise enough revenue through conventional taxation, emperors minted more debased coins to pay the army and fund administration. But more coins with less silver just accelerated inflation. It was a vicious cycle. Debasement led to inflation. Inflation required more coins. More coins meant more debasement. The empire was trapped in an economic death spiral of its own making. By 270 AD, Rome faced a stark reality. The military now consumed approximately 75% of the imperial budget, up from roughly 50% a century earlier. But this wasn't spending on conquest. This was spending on survival.
Germanic tribes pressed the Rhine and Danube frontiers. The Sassanid Persian Empire, more organized and aggressive than the Parthians before them, threatened the eastern provinces. Rome's legions were spread thin, defending every threatened border simultaneously. Here's where the mathematics of empire turned fatal. A defensive military posture costs more than an offensive one, because you must defend everywhere while your enemy can attack anywhere. Rome maintained approximately 30 legions along its frontiers by the 3rd century, roughly 150,000 to 180,000 men, plus an equal number of auxiliary troops. The annual cost of this military was staggering, estimated at over 1 billion sesterces per year. But the provinces under constant threat couldn't pay their full taxes. Egypt's grain shipments became unreliable due to raids and instability. The silver mines of Hispania produced less as workers fled rural areas. Trade routes were disrupted by bandits and competing warlords. The empire was spending more defending itself than it was earning from the territories it defended. This is the fundamental arithmetic of imperial collapse. Emperor Diocletian, who took power in 284 AD, recognized the crisis and attempted systematic reforms. He issued the Edict on Maximum Prices in 301 AD, setting legal price caps on over 1,000 goods and services, from bread to legal fees to transportation costs. It failed completely. Merchants simply stopped selling goods at the mandated prices, creating shortages. Black markets flourished. The edict was unenforceable and quietly abandoned.